In 1966, he led a long march from Wautoma to Madison on behalf of migrant farm workers. Jesus Salas is my special guest next on I Remember. Hi, I'm Jim Peck. Welcome to I Remember. Joining me tonight is Jesus Salas. Currently a teacher at the Milwaukee Area Technical College, his interest in education dates back to his activist days of the 60s and 70s. Take a look.
Wanting to be a teacher, Jesus Salas started college in the early 1960s. During the summers, he returned to central Wisconsin to work on educational projects for migrant farm workers. His parents had been part of the migrant labor force until relocating to Wautoma. As a third-generation migrant, Jesus personally understood the struggle workers faced. Wisconsin had laws governing minimum wage, child labor, workers' compensation, and collective bargaining, but there was a lack of enforcement. In 1966, Jesus Salas led a group of migrant farm workers on an 80-mile march from Wautoma to Madison. Passing fellow workers harvesting the fields, they walked for 5 days. Demanding better conditions and building support for unionization, the marchers arrived in the state capitol. The State Industrial Commission promised to act on their demands. The union, Obreros Unidos, or United Workers, played an important role in the history of migrant labor in Wisconsin. Salas was an organizer. In 1967, field workers at Libby, McNeil, and Libby became the first to vote yes to union representation. Jesus Salas co-founded a newspaper, La Voz Mexicana, that became a voice for the workers. Editor David Giffey covered the issues important to the migrant laborers. Labor leader Cesar Chavez inspired Jesus Salas. In the late 60s, Salas moved to Milwaukee and became active in the grape boycott. He worked locally in support of the national effort begun by Chavez on behalf of farm workers. Jesus Salas also participated in protests at the UWM campus in support of Latino students. In August of 1970, the demonstrators took over the chancellor's office. Prior to that fall, only 14 of 25,000 students enrolled at UWM were Hispanic. As a result of these actions, the Spanish-speaking Outreach Institute was created. It is known today as the Roberto Hernandez Center at UWM. Activist Jesus Salas continues to educate others. He now teaches at both UWM and the Milwaukee Area Technical College.
What was life like growing up as a migrant worker?
Well, I didn't know any other life, so there wasn't anything to compare it to. My grandfather was a migrant farm worker, and so was my father. And then he came up in the late 30s to Wisconsin. My granddad had showed him how to get here, and as a single man, they went back to Crystal City, Texas, our hometown, married my mother, and came here. And my second oldest brother was born here in 1941. Wow. So we've known Wisconsin quite some time. Yeah.
Was there a circuit that you used to follow?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, the crops determined where we ended up at what time of the year. We'd usually do the early crop in north central Wisconsin because the frost line would be gone there.
What would you be doing up there?
Asparagus.
Okay.
Asparagus in a little town by the name of Henry, Illinois. Then we would come up to Hartford, Wisconsin, and the old hemp plant over here. and lived in that housing, by the way, in those huge storehouses where they used to hang hemp during the Second World War. And then we got a little farmhouse after the second year. We used to do hoeing and thinning. This was before herbicides, and we had to do all that work. And then we'd finish there, and we go to the cucumber harvest up in Washera County. Finish that, then we go to the tomato harvest in western Indiana and Illinois, and then the early cotton harvest in by the upper Mississippi Delta, and the late cotton harvest in West Texas. And then we'd make it back home sometime late October, early November.
When would you start?
In May, late April, early May.
How old were you at this time?
Well, I joined my father, well, the whole family, my mom and my 5 brothers joined him when I was 7, and we stayed at it for almost 10 years.
How did you manage to go to school?
Well, my father was very good about that, you know. Everywhere we went, he always enrolled us in school. So I remember
Probably times when you weren't too crazy about that.
Well, it was exciting. We had been living in Crystal City, and this was during segregation days, as Jim Crow. So I never went to school with a white boy and a girl until actually I was migrating.
Really?
Where I went to grade school. I graduated from 8th grade in Henry, Illinois. Went to a couple weeks. Went to Henry High School. Went to Watoma High School for a couple more weeks, and of course my hometown in Crystal City High School also. And that's why we ended up relocating in 1959, because my dad was very concerned about, of course, our education.
Well, it must have been awfully difficult if you're spending a couple of weeks here and a couple of weeks there and trying to get into a school and then get into classes, and they're all at a little different pace. I mean, how did you keep any kind of continuity?
I really don't know how we did it.
But you did.
I had an older brother that was quite a reader, so wherever we went, we have library cards all over the Midwest. Wherever we went, he knew the Dewey Decimal System and where his books were. And of course, we had books all the time while we were migrating. So that sort of eased the transition from one school to another.
You mentioned that your dad was very big on education, which must have been a great help.
Oh, absolutely. Matter of fact, all of because we traveled in clans, or that is extended families. My cousins on my mother's side was a migrant worker, and all of my cousins. And then it included, in the early days, neighbors from Crystal City. Then as the clan grew bigger, we started getting folks to travel with us from neighboring communities. And of course, then I was already 10 or 11, so my dad would place me in somebody else's car. And you say, Jesus, you be the lead. Make sure you don't get lost. And of course, I knew how to read maps, and I could speak English also. And that was a treasure, because, you know, if we ever got lost, he always knew exactly what I had to do, where, you know, we would wait for each other, what service stations to go to. We knew how to travel.
Did you ever get lost?
Oh, everything that you can, everything that can possibly go wrong went wrong.
Like what?
Oh, well, flat tires. I mean, I think the Lord just tested our. Well, you know, one time we had a broken axle. We had an overloaded truck, burned out engines, and we traveled in caravans. So maybe my dad was very meticulous about his vehicles. So it wasn't just the problem with maintaining our vehicles, but the people that accompanied us, and they weren't as careful about their vehicles. Of course, that will hold up the caravan, and what used to be a 4 or 5 day trip could be extended to over a week. And of course, you remember the speed limit there at that time was in the 50s. I think we were traveling probably 45 miles an hour, 1,600 miles to get here.
Yeah. How many of you?
Well, the whole family, but our basic family unit was about 40 or 50, and of course, wow, that grew into the hundreds as additional neighbors, family members, their friends, and then, you know, people in the neighboring communities. My dad was a very fair guy, and they always liked to travel with him. You know.
You mentioned burned out engines, broken axles, which certainly are a bother, but also you had to be someplace by a deadline or you'd miss the crop.
Oh, absolutely. We had to be there because the crops determine our schedule. And but my dad was very careful. We always had dried meat. We always had canned goods. We had a kerosene stove. So if we ever got held up on the road, which we always ended up, you know, Mom would just get out all the utensils and the kerosene stove and get the dried meat and start feeding us, and just wait until the men got back with whatever part was missing.
Wow! And meanwhile, you're eating, you're washing, you're getting get clothes washed. I mean, how did you do all that stuff?
Well, I think the burden really, I think the was on the women. Of course, we were all children at the time, but I think that what we find is that migrant labor at the time was about women and children, as is poverty right now. Poverty is about women and children. I think most of the burden fell on our women. And in our particular case, we didn't have any sisters. There were 6 brothers, so we all had to do our help with the wash, help with everything. I was very good at ironing, so I used to pick up a couple of nickels on the weekends because my brothers would give me their shirts and their pants, and I had a couple more nickels than they did because I could iron. And we used to have these wood-fired stoves, so that we did the old ironing, where you put the iron right on the fire itself. We'd take it out. There would be a piece of cloth, and my mom would show us: don't ever put the iron directly on the shirt or on the pants. Make sure that you slide it through this burned out rag, and when it's nice and smooth, then you apply it to the shirt. And of course, what I would do to prevent any burns in my nice shirts, I'd iron them inside out, and that way, if I ever burned any of the shirts, nobody could see it except myself.
You got very smart very early. You make it sound like it was kind of an adventure and kind of fun. Is that the way you looked at it as a kid?
It was no. It was very hard work. It was very hard work, and I said it was especially difficult for the women and the young girls, because of course they were expected to be assuming responsibilities very early.
And they still worked in the fields.
In addition, well, everybody did that. The same thing, like when we started going to school in Henry and in Watoma, we got up at the break of dawn. We got a couple hours in before we went to school, and when we came back, changed our work clothes and finished up until nightfall. But farms were like that in those days. We ended staying. I remember every single family that we stayed with in the early migrant days. This was before agribusiness came in, and then they used to just herd people in. People didn't know where they were going. In the initial days when we started migrating, cucumber, say for instance, was a household industry. The workers were out there right alongside of us. Their children worked as long, or we worked as long as they did, and everybody worked that way. But it was very difficult, and it was more difficult for my free-spirited brothers. I had a younger brother that just couldn't get used to working those long days, and for him it was probably much more difficult than it was for some of the older ones. I was the third born, so I was expected to assume certain responsibility, including the caring of the three younger boys. But that fourth born just couldn't take to being out there all day. Was always getting into trouble.
Yeah, this was not an option. I mean, you had to be out there.
There was no place to. So no place to.
How did you get into trouble?
You'd get into. Well, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of different. There was no bathroom, so that we'd all have to go out into the woods, and all of a sudden, where's Rudy? And we'd all be looking. Well, he looked like he went into the woods in that direction. We'll go look for him. He might have gotten. He wasn't lost. He just wanted to do something else other than be working in the fields.
You mentioned that you stayed at many of the same houses year after year, and you went to some of the same schools year after year. Did people remember you? I mean, what did they think when Jesus Salas showed up in Watoma?
They look forward to seeing us, and we look forward to seeing them. And the way it worked, when we got back in the winter time, the area that we lived in is called the Winter Garden District, and they grow vegetables in the wintertime. Of course, because we were in school, we weren't able to work in the fields, and my dad wouldn't allow us to do that. But we were dependent completely on the growers and the processors, because they would advance us money to sustain ourselves during the winter months. So we were in hock. Wow. And everybody in the family knew it, and everybody knew that we had to, and we were anxious to get back and working to pay off those debts. And of course, if anybody got sick or hurt in the field, there went the season. In one particular year, Rudy broke his, there was a potato digger out in front. He was out messing around. This is a free-spirited one.
Yes, it had to be Rudy.
Yeah, right. And he pulled on the potato digger, that drops the apparatus into the digger. And it just threw him in, and he broke his collarbone.
Ooh.
We were loading a truck of with some vegetable product, and the fifth born, Frankie, fell off the truck and broke his arm. And even our dog, we had a dog that year, he got run over by it. So there were three members of the family with bandaged arms. And of course there were no insurance. So I mean, there was no, we knew it. We knew what had happened. And of course we had to work for weeks to pay those.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it wasn't quite as much fun as it
No,
as
it got
it
real
sounds like.
It got real serious. It got real serious because not only did we have to pay the debts that we incurred over the winter when we were not working, but those mishaps. And of course, that all gave me the background for some of the issues that arose when I was old enough to understand what were the problems. The problems weren't just individual problems that our family was suffering, but all of us, hundreds, all of the thousands of migrants that were coming up into the Midwest.
But not everybody became as active as you did. What was it that really fired you?
Well, I think I was very lucky because when we relocated my dad, and this is the only thing that we knew how to do, opened up a little restaurant in downtown Watoma. And that summer, we relocated in '59. The summer of 1960, there were some people that came from Madison that wanted to open up daycare centers for migrant children. At that time, there were no. This is before OEO. There was no legal aid, no child care. All of the so-called Great Society programs that came later were not in place. And they ran into me because I happened to be waiting on tables, and they knew I had been that we were a migrant family. They had relocated, so I knew where all the camps were, and they asked me, "Would you be willing to take us into the camps and talk to the families about we're starting this daycare center?" And that's how it started. So in the summer times, what I would do, my older brother Manuel went to college first, and a year later, then I joined him. So every summer after graduating from high school in '61, '62, '63, in '64, I worked for the migrant programs, and I did everything except drive the bus. I'd go out and recruit the kids, and I'd go pick them up in the bus. I had to go wake up real early, so make sure that I was there in the bus, go get them, and then spend all day with them, and then return with them in the evening at late afternoon.
Were the growers supportive of this, or did people kind of resent it and get scared of you?
No, well, there were no programs like this in the first place. And if we were dealing with children 5, 6, 7 years old, it was no problem. But 7 and 8 years old were already workers, and there was a place for them. Maybe they couldn't pick as fast, they couldn't pick as many cucumbers, but they'd bring the parents water. Or we used to bag the cucumbers in potato sacks. And if we ran out of them, you got a 7-year-old, the rows were real long, so you'd send the kids over to the end of the row. We need some more sacks. Or just to save some more time, we'd give them a can full of cucumbers, and you fill them out and bring me the can back and see. So there was a role for children. And of course, our families were watching us all the time to make sure who worked better and who worked more arduously. And
where's Rudy?
And where's Rudy? Rudy's out in the woods trying to find something to do besides pick cucumbers. But there was no resistance from the growers until we started talking about child labor laws, or that is, what were these children doing from 7 to 12 years old when the Wisconsin said that they should not be in the fields.
Yeah, they're supposed to be in school.
That's right, in school, or not working on their own. Certainly not working all day. But where could they stay? Where would they stay? They had to join their parents. Even the infants used to go with their cars. So find a shaded tree and keep the baby, and mom would work near the shaded tree area with her ear close to the car. And when the baby cried, run over and take care of it, and put it to sleep. Or maybe one of the 5 or 6 year olds would stay around and play with the baby, with everybody looking over in the area. The only one that stayed in the farm at that time were the elderly, who couldn't work anymore, and the children, infants. But everybody, 6, 7 years old, we were all on the fields all day.
What got you into union work? Was it that experience?
Well, it was those early years when I returned, and this is to the chagrin of my dad, because he had worked so hard for us to get us out of the fields. And then with these migrant programs, I was right back in there, and I was taking these people that wanted to do something about the migrant workers. And as I went back after the second or third year, I realized that it was a great help to bring these children out of the camps and provide, a safe, healthy the environment, give them some nutritious meals, etc. But the parents then would, and many of them that I had been migrant workers before for 10 years, so they would confide in me and they said, you know that such and such got injured, or do you know that we didn't get paid? So what ended up happening is that I started getting involved with issues that were non-educational. They were dealing with the working conditions. They were working with injuries. They were working with non-payment. They were working with violation of housing laws in addition to the violation of child labor laws. And I found, with the help of these people that came from Madison, that Wisconsin actually had more than any other state in the Midwest and possibly in the nation, the protective legislation, or that is, we had a child labor law, we had a minimum wage law, we had workmen's compensation laws, and in this state it didn't exclude migrant workers.
Then what was the problem?
The problem was enforcement. There was at that time, the agency that was supposed to enforce it, this legislation was the Industrial Commission, later called the Department of Industry, Labor, and Human Relations. So it was them that we wanted to get out in the fields while the migrants were there to inspect those camps, to follow up on some of the complaints that we had, and that's how I came to the need for collective bargaining, that we had to get together and negotiate collectively.
What was your first strike?
The march came first.
Okay.
And it wasn't something that I cooked out of my head. You know what was going on in the South at that time in the early '60s. Chavez marched the year before, and this was a means that we thought that we could bring attention to some of the problems that you and I were just talking about.
Now that was the march from Wautoma to Madison.
To Madison.
That got a lot of press.
It wasn't
all positive.
It wasn't all positive, and that some of the workers in the food processing plant thought it was a call to arms. I started getting calls from Kleiman, Wisconsin. There was a little town close to Wautoma where the march originated by the name of Elman. Those workers came up and said that they wanted to form a union. And of course, I didn't know anything about unionism other than what you know. And they were the closest to us, Elman being only about 30 minutes from Wautoma. So I went out to the plant, and I went out to their camp, and I said, well, let's see what we can do. And I called John Schmidt. John Schmidt at that time was just coming in as president of the state AFL-CIO, and he received me very warmly. And that during the potato strike, because we actually signed up the majority of workers and we went out on strike, was the week that he got inaugurated as a new president, and we developed a very warm and relationship over the many years. And he and local number 9 for the brewery workers and a whole bunch of other wonderful union leaders who were very instrumental in teaching me about what the unionism was, and they put me in contact with the School for Workers. And at that time there were 2 professors there, one Norris Tibbetts and Frank Lyons, and we started from the ground up. You first have to get the membership cards. You have to do this, and the first strike we lost. I just didn't have the knowledge, and we should have never gone out and strike. We should have done a lot of legwork before. But we actually got in front of the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission, and that was a mediating board that we have here in the state of Wisconsin, to hear our complaints. And they found the employer guilty of unfair labor practices. So the following year, when we started organizing Libby McNeil and Libby, we already knew, and the Labor Relations Board knew we were out there organizing, and they knew we were going to come and see them that next summer. But this year, what we did, that between '66 and '67, I returned home to Texas, and we started organizing over there, and we started telling the workers, because they only stayed here about 10 to 12 weeks, not enough time to form a union. So I went back. I still had family members, all my cousins, my grandmothers were alive and living down there, and I went and I talked to the workers. I said, this time when you come up, we're going to have a union ready for you.
You're good at this sort of thing.
No, I was.
You got good at it. You mentioned
by making all these mistakes. Those poor workers, they had to suffer through my apprenticeship.
Who are the people who influenced you along the way? You mentioned Cesar Chavez.
Well, of this group of people that came from Madison, it was Elizabeth Brandeis of Rauschenbusch. She was part of this delegation.
She was the daughter of Justice Brand. Actually.
Yes, yes, and she was an econ professor, and she was the one that directed me. She would. I wasn't even old enough to vote, and when she found out that I was sister, that we were interested in the same things, I was 19 or 20 years old. We were already testifying in front of the Industrial Commission about the conditions. She got John Reynolds to appoint me in my sophomore year in college to the Governor's Committee of Migratory Labor that Nelson had formed the year before. So yes, she, a woman by the name of Nancy Travis and Jenny Lynn, who committed themselves to bringing resources to the children. Church people, both Protestant and Catholic, who I would go and speak to, see if we could obtain their support, and then former colleagues of mine that left their work and their commitments to come and work for the union for nothing. David Giffey, who ran our newspaper, Mark Ehrenberg, who was a PhD student in economics, who would help us in the hearings in preparing the reports. Bill Smith, an African American that had gone to school in Fisk University in the South, who I met as a laborer in Findorf in Madison. Those four individuals, we formed the core of the union, and we set the groundwork for when the workers came back in the summer of '67, and that big strike that we had that year.
On that march, if I remember correctly, it was Father Jim Gruppy.
Gruppy, actually, we met when I moved to Milwaukee. He had already started the open housing marches over here, and I moved from Milwaukee because I called Cesar right before the march, Cesar Chavez in California. I had read about him in my days while I was in Madison. I asked him if we could use his Thunderbird, the flag. And I just, out of the blue, I looked for him, I looked for Delano, and then a call from Wisconsin. Took me a couple of days. He says, "What are you doing with this?" He says, "We're marching, from Watoma to Madison." So that fall, I met him, and he started to impress upon me the need for coordinating our activities. He was an independent union, and we were unaffiliated also. And I met that fall, and he impressed upon me the need to support the boycott in California.
The big Great Boycott.
Yes, at that time. It was already going on when I met him. So we continued the organizing activities in '67 and '68, and then in '68 I moved to Milwaukee, and I actually ran the Great Boycott here, and that's when I came into contact with Jim, very close contact, and of course he was right in the middle of the open house marches.
Exciting times. You brought back a lot of memories in little less than 30 seconds. How would you like people to think about Jesus Salas?
Well, I would like to think that to be remembered about our contribution, and not individual contribution, the legacy of the migrant workers, what it did to the economy of this state over 50 years, what it's done for the South Side of Milwaukee in terms of how that dynamic part of the community, that entrepreneurship, that dedication to service, the dedication to education. That's how I would like the legacy of the migrant farm.
Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you as always. We hope you'll join us next time as we continue to remember.